Hello and welcome to Games Past Their Prime. This is a show where I take a look at video games to determine if they are past their prime or not. For me to do so though, there are a couple key categories which I look at. Story, presentation, and gameplay. Then at the very end there's a conclusion section where I wrap everything up in a nice little bow. You guys have read the title. You know what game we're playing. Let's take a look at Army Men Sarges Heroes. The story of Army Men Sarges Heroes is a bit, well, bland. I'm not sure if there's really the word for it. Maybe boring would be a better description. Don't believe me? Well, let me lay it out for you. I imagine this section is going to be really short, so honestly the only reason I'm still talking is to try and drag out this segment so it doesn't end up being a couple of sentences long. Alright, let's just get into it. So you take control of Sarge, pretty much the main character throughout the majority of these games. Oh, and you heard me right. I said games. There is more than one. There is in fact many. Anyways, this takes place in the plastic world where there is a constant war between the Green Army and the Tan Army. The story starts when the Tan Army starts to invade the Green Army base. Sarge ends up rescuing Colonel Grimm and they manage to evacuate the base. Later in the game, Sarge ends up discovering the Tan Army is using these portals that lead to the real world. The Tan Army is using these portals to obtain weapons of mass destruction, which are actually just random items in the real world, such as toys or in many cases magnifying glasses. Frankly, this story gets a bit dark if you think about it, because in many cases the Tan Army is just straight up killing or torturing these people. In one scene, you see the Tan Army capture some of the Green Army and start to actually melt them with the magnifying glass. Or in another scene where they use some type of toy to turn prisoners into freaking spiders. What? This doesn't make any sense! Anyways, Sarge will go about rescuing commandos of his own unit, the Bravo Company. At this point, it is Sarge's job to save everyone and to destroy the portals to the real world so that they can't be used by the Tan Army anymore. And this is pretty much the whole story. I mean, there's a bit more to it, but it really doesn't matter. For example, there's this whole story about the colonel's daughter who gets captured, or she's a traitor or something, blah, 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 blah. At the end, Sarge ends up rescuing her from the evil Tan Army, and he does this like really awkward kiss with her where he lifts her up by her head and kisses her, and the entire time I'm only thinking how painful that's gotta be. Yeah, this story is pretty boring, and frankly, I don't really have much else to say about it, so let's just move on to the presentation. So the presentation of this game is not bad, actually. The graphics are alright, and they do a pretty good job of capturing how the army men look in that sort of plastic look. They also did a good job on some of the levels. For example, the levels where you are in the real world look really cool. They are colorful and vibrant, and there's a lot of interesting things you can do with a style like this, where you basically play as toys in a real-world environment. Sadly, however, there is only a couple of these stages, and while these are really well done and look amazing, the ones where you are in the plastic world don't look nearly as good. In fact, most of the plastic world in general is just a bit boring to look at. And there's also one level that actually ends up repeating, and all they did to tell them apart was one was at night. This felt a bit lazy, obviously, but I've seen much worse when it comes to that, so I'm willing to look the other way. However, it's just a bit sad to see half of the game look really good, and the other half look bland and boring. It's just a weird contrast. It's almost as if it was a whole different team working on the game. So all in all, the graphics are pretty decent, half is good and half is bad. Now let's move on to the sound, and the guns sound pretty generic. They do their job, I guess, but I wasn't blown away. Now music, on the other hand, is actually pretty good. though it does get a bit samey once you get further into the game. It does a good job overall of getting you amped up to play, but the music kind of has the same problem that the graphics do. Half of it is pretty good, while the other half is just kind of boring to listen to. Again, it just felt like a whole different team was working on it. It's so weird to see how this turned out. On one hand, I like some of the music and graphics and think it was really well done given its age. And on the other hand, I get a boring generic army game with boring generic music. I honestly don't know how to feel about it, even at the time of me writing this. Well anyways, let me play at least some of the good tracks for you. And mind you, these aren't labeled, so you're just gonna get some random gameplay and no title at the top of the screen like I normally do. So here, enjoy. So the gameplay for Army Men Sarges Heroes is pretty easy to describe. It's a third-person shooter with a bit of platforming involved. Nothing too complicated about that at all. In fact, with how simple this game is to describe, I imagine this section will be a bit short. Anyways, let's talk about the gameplay and how it feels. So the overall movement of the character feels alright. Nothing too clunky, and the camera most of the time will be behind the character. Now, I noticed something that did bother me. See, this game sort of uses a bit of tank controls where you can't really turn without stopping. So you move forward and backward with the control stick, and you can turn in place if you stop moving and move the control stick side to side. Now, this doesn't sound like an issue. However, I actually found you can move freely around under the right conditions. So if you start to run and try to run around, the camera will lock in place, and then you can run around fairly freely. The downside of this is the controls feel like they change, and on top of this, obviously having the camera lock in place is not very ideal. This mechanic feels really weird, and frankly I'm not sure why it's in the game. I only noticed it a handful of times because rarely will you be charging into enemies because you will die rather quickly, so you really will need to take your time when you go through these levels. Next I want to talk about the shooting, because it's a bit awkward, but I think it does well enough for what it is. See, kind of like the previous third-person shooter game I played, you can just start shooting and the character will just sort of home in on the closest target. However, if there is an elevation difference, this doesn't seem to work so well. This is where you are given the option to use an aiming button, which does well enough, but aiming feels a bit slow using this, and there didn't seem to be a way to speed it up at all. So if you are in a panic situation, you will likely die because the aiming is just so dang slow. Now let's talk about the platforming. This is another one of those cases where it doesn't feel great. Like, it works most of the time, but it can be a bit frustrating. First you have a standing still jump, which if you just press the button will be a short jump, or if you hold down the button you'll get a higher jump. Then you have your running jump, which is exactly what it sounds like. Now the problem is that you never get a good feeling of the distance you need to start running before you will actually do a running jump, and you never get a good feeling of the distance you can actually jump over. So there were times in levels that I looked at a gap and thought there was no way I was going to make that jump, only to find out later that I needed to get over to that platform because it had what I needed on it. I then would gamble and try to make that jump to find that it really wasn't that big of an issue, or in another case that I could barely make it so my thoughts were actually correct. So another thing I need to bring up is that Sarge can grab onto ledges, so if you get close to an area that is scalable and jump, Sarge will grab onto that ledge and pull himself up onto it. Now later in the game, it combines this idea with the jumping idea. Most of the time this isn't an issue because you just jump straight up and grab the ledge. Not a problem. However, it then combines it with the running jump, and the amount of times that I would either jump and not grab onto the ledge, or the amount of times I would hit the jump button and Sarge just wouldn't jump, is a very high number. This got very frustrating as we got to later levels where the areas were used even more, And then it got even more annoying when the platforms you were moving across on were literal rulers, which by the way, aren't very wide and make for very crappy platforms. Alright, now that I have mentioned some of the issues I have with the game, let's just jump into the controls. Alright, so kind of like what I already talked about before, pushing backward or forward on the stick is what's going to allow you to move. And if you move left or right on the stick, it'll rotate the character. Now I kind of want to show you this kind of locking screen I've been talking about. And it doesn't really lock per se, but it stops following Sarge from this back position like it normally does. So let me just show you. So once you start running, if you turn, you can kind of see it kind of goes, like the camera kind of zooms out a little bit here. And it just kind of does what it wants. And then when you let go, it kind of will just zoom back on its normal positioning that you normally would be playing in. These controls just feel very clunky. And it's just, I don't like this scheme. I don't know why they have this in the game. I imagine it's because they're trying to incentivize you being able to run and gun besides just slowly going through a level, but it just doesn't work very well. Aiming in that mode is basically impossible, and trying to shoot anything, you're just going to waste a crap ton of ammo doing it, to be honest. Your A button isn't just your jump button, but also your interact button, but it will jump. And if you get next to a box, it'll allow you to climb the box, stuff like that. B button is what allows you to switch weapons. You can kind of see that in the top right corner there. And the Z button down here is what's going to allow you to fire your weapon. Now if I hold down the right C button and I move left and right, you can kind of see Sarge will start to strafe. I basically never use this. I can see a world where maybe you might, but I never used it. The up C button is going to change camera angles. You can kind of see the different zoom levels there from close to medium to far. And the left C button, you're going to dive on the ground. You can get back up from the ground by pushing the A button. That'll go to kneeling and standing. And then the down C button will allow you to go back down into kneeling or laying on the ground. Now, you can also aim by pushing this R button on the top here. And you can kind of see that this will pull up a reticle on the screen. And it does have inverted controls. I'm getting more and more used to this because 90s games seem to like inverted controls. But I still don't like it. I think it's dumb. I don't know why you put this in the game. It's just dumb. 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 Now, if you happen to have the sniper rifle out and go into aiming mode, you kind of see that you got a scope here rather than just your normal aim reticle. And you can zoom in and out by pushing up on the C buttons or down on the C buttons. And that's pretty much it. That's all the controls other than having your start button, which pauses the game. That is literally all there is for the controls. Pretty simplistic. Nothing really else to talk about, so let's just head back over to the main script. So one thing I haven't talked about yet is the different types of weapons you have to use. You have your classic AR, to a sniper rifle, to a bazooka, etc. However, most of the guns feel a bit samey. For example, you can get a submachine gun and it doesn't really feel all that different to an AR, except for maybe firing a bit faster. The sniper rifle is different obviously due to having a scope that can zoom in and out. And the bazooka is basically just a better version of the grenade launcher, and the grenade launcher is just a better version of, well, a grenade. While they work a bit different, they all produce an explosion, and they don't feel that different to use for the most part. Honestly, as I was playing through the game, I was just getting a bit bored. It never really wowed me, except for when we were in the real world, because that just looked really well done. Now, I do want to talk about one other thing that did also bother me. This game really has no checkpoints, so like a classic game, you need to run through the whole level to beat it and get a password that would allow you to skip to the next level if you needed to stop playing. Now this in itself is not really that big of an issue. However, there is also no lives, and some of these missions can be a bit long. So if you die, you will need to play that entire mission over again, and it can feel like you just wasted 20 minutes, and now you need to replay those 20 minutes again. For some people, this probably sounds pretty minor, but when it's a game that you aren't really loving or just feels a bit mediocre, this can be really annoying. I can't count how many times I got near the end of the mission, died, and then decided to just skip to the next level because I couldn't be bothered to play that exact level for another 20 minutes is a very high amount. Ultimately, this is one of those games where half of it I like and the other half I dislike, and when you combine the two, you are left with just at best a mediocre game. With that, let's head to the verdict. The verdict of Army Men Sarges Heroes is a game past its prime. I seriously doubt there were many people who thought this would go the other way. This game just has too many flaws for me to really ignore, and frankly, even what was good that was there wasn't even fantastic. It was just frankly good. So let's go through the top 5 reasons I believe this game to be past its prime. Number 1. The story is as bare bones as it gets. It's not intriguing, it's not engaging, and honestly, it barely does the basic job of laying out a story for a player to be called to action over. It's just not good. 2. The presentation is all over the place, from some good graphics to some boring graphics, to some good music to some boring music. It's just a weird jumbled up mess of things that confuses me how you can go from having a boring concept that isn't executed well to a really good concept that is executed pretty well. Like I said previously, it almost feels like completely different studios or people worked on the first half compared to the second half. 3. The gameplay is alright. Nothing great, and nothing totally garbage either. While the jumping is annoying along with the platforming, it works most of the time. And while later in the game it got pretty bad, that's a small percentage compared to the whole game. Still wasn't good though. Number 4. The gunplay feels the same through the whole game. There is very little change to the entire chemistry of the game. You get a mission, you go in and kill a bunch of tan soldiers, you complete those couple of objectives, rinse, repeat. There is no break of any kind from this gameplay. There are no other sections. It is that same thing over and over. Normally, this isn't a huge deal as long as the gameplay is engaging enough and fun to start with. If it's not fun to start with, it's just doomed to fail. Number 5. Frankly, I didn't enjoy my time with this game. I didn't detest it or even hate it, but if I wasn't playing this for the review, I likely would have stopped playing after right around the second mission. It just wasn't fun to play. There was never a time where I was thinking, alright, this is where it gets good. In fact, most of the time while I was playing, I was just thinking, is this really all there is? It's weird because I remember playing this when I was younger and actually enjoying the game, but clearly this game has not aged well. If you still want to play even after this, go ahead. I won't stop you, but it's not a game I will personally recommend trying. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy watching it, please consider subscribing. I upload videos every Sunday. Stay tuned at the end of the video to get an audio hint at what my next video will be. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and thanks for watching.